Well, most of you saw the live stream that I made today about the ZEN4 announcement and the RDNA 3 sneak peek, and today's video is to kind of do a recap of what we saw in that event of ZEN4 mostly, and with most things explained. So we'll be focusing on several topics, several main points, let's call them that, which are 5 nanometers, DDR5, PCI Express 5, AVX 512, 13% IPC, 29% single core performance, and power efficiency. Right after a short word from our sponsor. Today's video sponsor is GVG, where using my SKG discount code leads to a 25% off across several products, making a Windows 10 serial key only $16. After the payment, you'll receive the key in your account, and all you need to do is to introduce it in your Windows settings, and bam! You have an activated system. In the beginning of the announcement, AMD starts talking about IPC and single core performance, claiming that they have the fastest CPU core for gaming with 13% IPC, which led to 29% single core performance. Now, if you don't know much about processors and how they work, well, IPC are the instructions per cycle or instructions per clock. Usually per cycle, should be per cycle, but anyway, IPC is the amount of work that a CPU can do with that exact frequency, let's say that, while the single core performance is the amount of work that the CPU does on its max frequency. Since these CPUs actually increase the boost performance by a lot, taking in consideration that they boost up to 5.7 GHz, while the previous generation has a hard time boosting up to 4.7, for example. Only the higher end chips like the 5950X have a boost of 5 GHz, okay? In this generation we have a minimum boost of 5.5 GHz, which also helps the single core performance, that alongside many other things, okay? But for now, 13% IPC and 29% single core performance. Then we had some tests of the 5950X versus the 7950X, with 32% increase in Dota 2, 35% increase in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which is a really CPU heavy title, 6% in Borderlands 3, 13% in CSGO, and in terms of multi-threading and work capability, we had 48% more on V-Ray render, 30% more on Blender render, 48% more on Cinebench R23 multi-threading, and 45% increase on POV-Ray. Now, how to explain this properly? Well, the IPC increased due to several things, like for example, a big improvement in branch prediction and a big improvement in L2 cache, so they doubled the L2 cache per core. And as we saw with the Ryzen 7 5800X 3D, the cache, the L3 cache, also improved a lot the performance in gaming, and the L2 cache isn't different. As for multi-threading, well, things change a lot because well, you may say, okay, but it's only 29% increase in single core performance. How do we actually have so much difference in terms of multi-threading? And the main difference is power draw. Because the 5950X, in terms of stock, that CPU is pretty power efficient. But as soon as you enable, for example, PBO or you use Curve Optimizer, the power limits will go up and the performance will go up as well in terms of multi-threading. Basically, the huge difference that you see here is that the 7950X at stock has higher power limits, making the multi-threading core boosts be way higher than the 5950 XT. Imagine that the 5950 XT has a single core boost of 5 GHz. But when you actually have all cores stressed out, the boosts will be, let's say, 4.4 or 4.5 GHz at max. At max, most likely even lower than that, like 4.2 GHz. When you overclock, you have, let's say, a max boost of 4.4 or 4.5 in all cores, but the power draw goes higher and by a decent margin. And the 7950X has that higher boost clocks from the start, okay, because it has also a way higher power limit. That's why we see those 48% in VRender, 48% in Cinebench, and so on, so on, so on. That's basically it. Then we have the 7950 compared with the 12900K. having 23% more performance in Dota 2, 14% more performance in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, a tie on Borderlands 3, and minus 1% on CSGO, with 62% increase in V-Ray performance, 36% in Blender, 41% in Cinebench, and 41% in POV-Ray as well, alongside 47% increase in performance per watt. So this is a really big thing because these results that we actually have here versus the 12900K are huge. In terms of gaming, Alder Lake is one generation over the Ryzen 7000 series. And now we have these results with Dota 2, Shadow of the Tomb Raider having way better results, and some games will also have way better results on the ZEN4 architecture. And in terms of multi-threading, yes, we have the same price as the 12900K, but way better multi-threading ability on V-Ray, Blender, Cinebench, and POV-Ray, which leads to 47% increase in performance per watt compared to the 12900K, because we have the same performance with 47% less power draw, or the same power draw with 47% more performance, which is crazy. And they actually showed several things like a single thread performance of 2125, while the 12900K was having 2040 points. So that means that even the 7600X, which doesn't boost as high as the other CPUs, has higher single thread performance than the 12900K. That's big at $300. And also 11% faster in F1 2022. And to complete those results, AMD actually added now non-competitive gaming instead of just competitive gaming that like we had before, Dota 2, CSGO and so on, with the 7600X versus the 12900K. 2% increase in Shadow of War, 11% increase in F1 2022, 17% in Rainbow Six Siege, which is great, a tie in Cyberpunk 2077, and minus 3% in GTA 5. Obviously, there will be games where the 12900K will be faster, like GTA 5. There's no doubt on that. But overall, I believe that the 7600X will be actually faster in gaming than the 12900K. Yeah, pretty much sure. And to actually compare the IPC on the lower end chips, because we actually have the comparison in between the 5950X and the 7950X, we now have a comparison in between what I believe to be the 5700X and the 7700X, because it is stated as 8 cores, 16 threads, but now with a fixed frequency of 4 GHz. Basically, they put those same CPUs at 4 GHz. They decreased the base clock, or at least they manually overclocked them to 4 GHz. And don't forget that the 7700X has a way higher frequency boost than the 5700X. We're talking about, let's say, 800 MHz over, almost 1 GHz over the 5700X, but they locked both at 4 GHz to see what the performance difference would actually be. And it's insane. We have crazy results from 3% to over 39% increase. For example, 3% in Fortnite at the same frequency, but like I told you before, the frequencies are way higher on the 7700X, meaning that the performance increase will most likely be 10 or 15% in Fortnite. We have 4% in GTA 5. We have also, let me see some more games like the Shadow of the Tomb Raider. We had 12% increase at the same frequency of 4 GHz. Assassin's Creed Valhalla with 17% increase at the same 4 GHz, meaning that at the normal boost we'll have over 20% easily. But even better than that, 24% increased performance in Watch Dogs Legion, meaning that with the normal core boosts of, let's say, 5.5 GHz, the difference will be even higher. We'll most likely be looking at 30 or 35% or even more than that difference in Watch Dogs Legion, which is insane if you ask me, insane. And after this, AMD actually proceeded to show the ZEN4 IPC contributors, basically showing us what made the 13% IPC increase in ZEN4. And remember that frequency and IPC isn't everything, because on the older Lake CPUs, just the fact of using indeed DDR5 versus DDR4 in some games make you have a huge performance gain. In some games it won't make a difference at all, but in games that actually benefit from it, the IPC is the same, the IPC increase is the same, but the usage of DDR5 alone brings a way higher performance boost. The same applies to ZEN4. Doubled L2 cache, improved execution engine, a better branch prediction, redesigned front end, and double pumping of 256 bits for AVX 512. The L2 cache alone would help in lots of games, because games do way more repetitive tasks and instructions than other applications, for example, like rendering applications and so on. So games have a lot of repetitive instructions, and the more cache you have, the more those instructions can be stored on the cache and then loaded way faster than picking them from RAM. That's the difference, and that's why it makes so much difference in some games and not in others. Depends on how the game works. In some games like Far Cry 6, for example, having lots of L3 cache helps a lot and when I say a lot, it's kind of an insane difference, as you can see, going from the 5800X to the 5800X 3D, and the L2 cache is not the same, but pretty close to that. And after showing several things like results for the 7950X versus the 12900K, the 7600X as well, after showing all of that, we went for the AM5 socket. Now we have LGA versus PGA. Basically we have the pins on the motherboard instead of having the pins on the CPU like we have had for decades on AMD CPUs. Finally we have LGA once again for the AMD CPUs, up to 230 watts socket power delivery to ensure higher boost clocks in multi-threading. We also have DDR5 and PCI Express 5 now, and we have a compatibility for previous AMD 4 cooling solutions. Any cooler that works on your Ryzen motherboard right now, it will work also on your AM5 CPU, basically on your new Ryzen 7000 series CPU. And even for the 8000 and 9000 that will also be supported by AM5, your CPU cooler will still work perfectly. For now we have two available chipsets as well. We have the X670 and B650, both having their extreme variants, allowing more PCI 5 connections amongst other features. Some of those features are basically the PCI Express 5 ones. The lower end motherboards will have only PCI Express 4, for example, while the better ones will have PCI Express 5 just for the GPU or for the NVMe, so you actually have to choose in between those lanes if you want PCI Express 5 for the GPU or for the NVMe, while the extreme versions will have PCI Express 5 for both the NVMe and the GPU. And if we get the best motherboards, the X670 Extreme, we actually have PCI Express 5 in all PCIe lanes and all NVMEs, okay? Everything the best, but at the same time, the prices will be... But now do you ask, why do I actually need PCI Express 5? PCI Express 3 isn't even fully stressed and we already have PCI Express 4. Why do we need PCI Express 5? And I tell you right away why do we need it. Because of two things. The first one is ray tracing and the second one is DirectStorage. And you may ask yourself once again, but ray tracing, that's a GPU thing. And why does it take so much PCI Express bus to actually run it, PCI Express bandwidth to run it? Well, because we have real-time reflections, so we have lots and lots of data flowing through the PCI Express slots, so we need higher bandwidth. If you watch this video made by Hardware Unboxed, you can see that going from PCI Express 3 to PCI Express 4 on the RTX 3090 Ti, the difference in performance was pretty noticeable in Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered because of the ray tracing, because of how the ray tracing reflections would actually require a higher bandwidth. And that's why PCI Express 5 is indeed important, because the next GPUs will be way faster than the current GPUs. And if we already see a difference from PCI Express 3 to PCI Express 4 in recent games, we will definitely see a difference with ray tracing from PCI Express 4 to PCI Express 5 in graphics so powerful, such as the upcoming RTX 4000 series and RX 7000 series. So that's why you need it. And then DirectStorage, because with DirectStorage, instead of the GPU actually asking the CPU for some textures, for example, from your hard drive, going from hard drive, CPU, then GPU, with DirectStorage, the GPU goes and grabs the things that it needs for VRAM from the hard drive. So more PCIe bandwidth that we need. And since we'll have DirectStorage soon, more PCI Express bandwidth will be needed in order to have faster load times, or at least to eliminate stutters completely due to that, to DirectStorage, which is really insane. More PCI bus with needed, but way faster load times, and for that we need PCI Express 5. We do not need per se, but it is advisable. AMD EXPO was also presented, which is kind of an extreme memory overclocking profile like the XMP that we know for Intel. Now AMD has EXPO, and they already have EXPO certified kits, meaning that you'll have better performance out of the box, better stability, and lower system latencies. That's one of the things that we can get with EXPO kits, because they are indeed prepared, out of the box prepared for the Ryzen 7000 series. They will be expensive as hell also, but they will bring you the best experience, the flawlessness and the best experience in terms of stability as well. So they will bring you less headaches. You just throw money at it for having less headaches. As for motherboard pricing, we start with $125, but for the PCI Express 4 version, so no PCI Express 5. But well, it's $125 for a new chipset motherboard, which is not bad at all, and I repeat, it's not bad at all. $125 for a B650 is pretty acceptable, even with only PCI Express 4. And the cherry on the top of the cake is basically the planned to at least till 2025, but they actually put there 2025 plus. And this is about longevity, and it seems that the AM5 platform will last as long as the AM4, or maybe even more. AM4 platform lasted since 2017, with its last CPU being released in 2022, which is the 5800X 3D, meaning that in some motherboards from 2017, so 5 years ago, you can actually use a CPU released in 2022, and that's insane in terms of longevity, and it will make you not spend so much money in the long term. Like going now for the AMD platform, for the M5 platform, you'll actually spend more money because you need a new DDR5 kit, you need a new motherboard, and you need a new CPU. But in the long term, that motherboard will still suffice, and you can actually use the next generation CPUs in that same motherboard, making you actually spend less money across the several years to come, which is great. As for pricing, well, the 7600X starts at $299 like the 5600X, and taking in consideration the inflation and so on, well, I believe that $299 is actually pretty okay. It is not nice, but it is pretty okay, with a possible non-X version going for $249. It is pretty decent if you ask me. It's a new CPU, the new TSMC 5nm process node, and still we have the same $299 price bracket. As for the 7700X, well, we have a price of $399, which is higher than the $299 on the 5700X, but the 5700X came way later. It was not released at the 5000 series launch, with the 5800X having $449 MSRP, and that one was the one which was released at launch. So we have lower price by $50 in comparison to the previous generation. As for the 7900X, we have $549 as the same $549 for the 5900X, And as for the 7950X, we have $699 MSRP in comparison to the $799 with the 5950X, meaning that we have $100 less on the top tier CPU, which is great, maybe to compete with the current 12900K and with the 13900K to come, obviously. We have $50 less on the 8-core 16-thread CPU, and we have the same MSRP on the 6-core 12-thread CPU. And I do believe that the 7700X will be the best price performance chip that you can get, at least for now at launch, with the AM5 platform. So, pretty nice. Some price cuts on some chips and equal prices in others. Very nice. And well, this is all funny and everything, but what about availability? Will we actually be able to get those CPUs at the release date? Will we actually be able to get those CPUs to buy them in stores? Or will they be out of stock for at least 6 months like we had previously seen? Well, Dr. Lisa Su says that we expect no supply restraints on Zen4. And I believe that can actually be true, since it is the first 5nm CPU and TSMC is basically having lots of production only for AMD on 5nm, so Intel uses its own fabrication, so no need for 5nm, and the next 5nm usage will be most likely on the RDNA 3 GPUs, which aren't still on mass production. So Zen4, I do believe that Zen4 will have no restraints, and we will actually be able to buy them on stores at the beginning. Now, take in consideration that these prices are MSRP, and in Europe, since we have taxes, way higher taxes, and importation fees, well, prices will be higher, but that's normal. It was always that way, so don't worry. As for me, I did this live stream yesterday and I was very excited for the Zen4. I will get myself a Ryzen 7 7700X since I do some editing, and I do believe that 8-core 16 threads will be the sweet spot now, so I won't go for the 7600X, but possibly I'll just get a 7600X later, or I'll ask AMD to send one in order to do some tests. And I do believe that AMD will send me a 5800X 3D, or at least they said they most likely would. And that will be very nice to test, for example, the 7700X, still 8-core 16 threads, but with less L3 cache, to actually see if it performs better or worse than the Ryzen 7 5800X 3D. I believe that those tests will be interesting. And well guys, thanks a lot for watching this long ass video. If you're watching this part in the end and you're crazy enough to watch all this time of video, thank you a lot. Don't forget, leave your like, subscribe and share this video, and see you in the next one. Leave your comment in the comment section and I will answer as fast as I can, as always. Ciao.